Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let's just kind of kick off. And can you just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself and also about your journey?
Yes. So I'll just briefly reintroduce myself. I'm Karla. Pronouns are she, hers. I serve at Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, or EPIC, as our deputy director, which I joined about 8 to 9 months ago. I am daughter to immigrant parents. My mom is from the village of Vatia in American Samoa, and my dad is Aymara from the village of Quime in Bolivia. I am a first generation American, or Samoan American, Bolivian American as well, here in the US. And as throughout the COVID pandemic, I've also was studying public health and was actively involved in on the ground mobilizing to bring necessary services and resources to the Pacific Islander community and in my hometown and the local region of the Inland Empire. So before coming to EPIC, I was doing work around data disaggregation as a co-founder and policy director at the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Data Policy Lab that is at UCLA. It continues to support Pacific Islander communities by bridging and increasing access to data that is accessible to communities in order to uplift advocacy and social justice. And just a little bit about EPIC. EPIC is a national advocacy organization that serves to advance social justice for Pacific Islander communities through culture-centered advocacy, research, leadership development, and our recent pillar is narrative change. And we have been established since 2009. And yeah, we are just so happy to be highlighted in this series.
So we're very happy that you're here. And Karla, can you tell us who are Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders, or NHPIs?
Yes, so NHPIs are a very diverse, broad community. We are the indigenous peoples of Oceania, and Oceania is a region that is made up of obviously people, or most often people know Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. Those are the regions that comprise Oceanias. And so some of the countries under Micronesia is Guahan or Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Pohnpei, Kosrae, the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau. For Melanesia, some of those countries include Fiji, Tokelau or Tuvalu, and Tuvalu, and other regions, the Solomon Islands, and then Polynesia, areas like Samoa, American Samoa, Hawaii, and so forth. So NHPIs, there are about 1.6 million now since the 2020 census. Here in the US diaspora, some of the largest the states with the largest communities of NHPIs include first in Hawaii, and then followed by California, which is where I am. About a third of all Pacific Islanders live here in the state of California. And we represent so many diverse communities, so many diverse languages and cultures as well. And we also have very unique statuses here in the US that also only exist here that I can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, that's who NHPIs are. And I was also just going to share, we're often, people often hear about the term Asian American and Pacific Islander, or AAPI or AANHPI, and Pacific Islanders are a distinct racial group under that umbrella.
Well, that's a great question. That's a great point too, because we've had many talks a part of this summit and last year's summit where that it's such a big umbrella. It's so many millions of people, and we're trying to really have a global reach here. I know we have one speaker that is from India, so it is this huge global community that we're trying to kind of put into a few letters, which is definitely not easy to do or fair to do. And as you're saying, every community also has different issues that come up. So how do the NHPI issues differ from other communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I also want to correct myself really quick. I misspoke in saying that Tuvalu and Tokelau were under Melanesia, but that they are both Polynesian countries. So let me make that clear. But that's a great question on how do Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander issues differ from other communities, correct? And there's so many ways, just because the history of the Pacific Islands also differ from other communities and our relationships with, for instance, the US. So for the Pacific Islander community, there are unique statuses that only exist for us. For instance, those who are born in American Samoa or American Samoans are considered US nationals who have limitations on their rights to vote and also on their pathway to citizenship. They're not automatically US citizens, whereas others in the Pacific Islands and other territories such as Guam, those folks are considered US citizens. And then there's also the unique community under the Compact of Free Association, or COFA, which includes areas like the Federated States of Micronesia and Palau. And they have a very unique status here in the US where they are considered non-immigrants and are allowed to live and work or study in the US, but don't have access to all public services. And so because of these very complex political relationships that every community under the NHPI umbrella has with the US, it also leads to so many different issues and advocacy areas that we have to work under. One of the most recent wins, I guess, for the COFA community is the restoration of Medicaid, which came, obviously during the COVID pandemic, which is also unfortunate because a lot of our communities suffered so much from COVID, and it took being under a national emergency for us to finally get some push in and for healthcare. So that was a big change. And other issues broadly that impact our community that EPIC also focuses on is health, education, and immigration. Under health, there's so many chronic illnesses that plague our community, as well as for education. When we see statistics about how AAPIs do in higher education, it can look really high. It looks like, everyone's doing well in, obtaining a higher ed degree. But when you disaggregate those two communities and only look at educational attainment rates for Pacific Islanders, the numbers are actually very low. So there's really clear inequities in education for Pacific Islanders and how we have access. And obviously that has a lot of implications for, our access to higher paying jobs, where we are represented in different industries, and so forth. And then finally in immigration, which is so tied to all those unique statuses, all those defined whether you are a citizen, a national, or, also the growing population of undocumented Pacific Islander immigrants here in the US. But those are some to name.
Yeah, there's so many great issues that you just brought up there. And I've heard similar facts about in terms of the educational facts that you shared, and that again, it's the issue that we often have when we're talking about an identity group and kind of trying to put everyone into one big tent. There isn't a one size fits all for everyone. And I certainly didn't know all of the different statuses of everyone that you just said. And that earlier today, we actually had a talk about empowering the AAPI community vote. And it's so interesting that in some of these communities that EPIC is trying to empower, that some of those people don't have that right to vote. And so it's fascinating too, that it's we really do need to look at everyone as individuals and not as, kind of big parts, which kind of like makes me think too, like, as you mentioned, we're using this kind of term, or that's more common now, the AAPI community. And, what's the importance of lifting up the PI in that? Because I think sometimes, as to what you're saying too, the PI can kind of be pushed a little to the side a little bit because we're focusing a lot on maybe just the AA there. But what is that importance of lifting up the PI?
Yeah. So API, and in general, in the grand scheme of, the US demographic, population, NHPIs are a very, small, it's a much smaller community compared to others, right? 1.6 million compared to millions and millions of other communities, and their scale. And so I think because we are, such a smaller community, people tend to, only look at numbers. People think, numbers is equal to greater power or something like that. But, we are still a significant community here in the US and continue to grow. And in fact, there are some NHPI populations where there are more PIs or NHPIs here in the US than there are in some Pacific Island countries. So we do represent a great number of people here in the, in the American social fabric. And so even under AAPI, it's also still comparatively small to the Asian American community. And I think because of that, of those sheer, number differences, that we often get forgotten, or and you don't often hear about us when it comes to API spaces. And that's why it's so intentional to uplift the Pacific Islander part, or the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander part in that huge acronym, especially it being AA and NHPI Heritage Month. How are we lifting up such a small and marginalized community that has so many inequities, but aren't often highlighted because of, aggregation with other groups. And that not only includes Asian Americans, but, in racial data that we see across all industries for education, health, even incarceration, PIs, because we're small, we're probably more, our population is probably more comparative to like American Indian, Alaska Natives, where we're often just, 1% or less than 1%. And because of that, we're either grouped with another larger group, or we're just completely forgotten in data. People put us in an other category, or there's a asterisk at the bottom of the data graph that says, this population didn't have enough, it wasn't a big enough sample size, and therefore we didn't include that data. And so that can really impact our community. Data is power to be visible. It gives you access and the ability to advocate for your community when you talk to policymakers. If you want to be able to say, hey, this is how this issue is affecting us, but we don't have the numbers, and that can also severely harm our ability to build political power. And so, that is all the different types of erasure that our community faces, not only during the API Heritage Month, because we're such a smaller community than others, but it's also historical, that we've been told that we're too small to consider. But there's so many contributions that we have in here in the US diaspora. And we're also hyper visible in some industries than others, right? When you think of professional sports, there's Samoan Americans are, like, I think the rate is 3 times or 5 times as likely to be drafted compared to other racial ethnic groups. And it's not just football, but other sports as well. And then also in the entertainment industry is another area that we're hyper visible. And why is that? Why are we only being seen in entertainment and in sports? And we have a lot of great I guess models there, but I think that also ties back to harmful narratives about Pacific Islanders, that we are only useful for our bodies, our physique, or for entertainment, which is also rooted in colonization and how we were and continue to be sexualized for entertainment. But our communities, thrive in other industries as well. We also exist in the healthcare system. We also, are in education. I think I remember seeing a rate about the Tongan community has the highest proportion of folks with the PhD. And not many people know that, the highest number of PhDs per capita than any other country in the world. And not many people know that, but, they'll know stuff about where our folks are at in the NFL or The Rock. And that's, the most baseline knowledge that they have about Pacific Islanders who are visible. But there's so many other ways that, we are and can be more visible in other industries. So I think that's the most significant part about lifting this up is we're not just, this is not the only narrative about Pacific Islanders.
No, totally. Yeah. And I'm just looking at even some of the data that we put in the description for this talk, that I think in the last census, the AAPI community, 20 million members in the US, 690,000 of those identified as NHPI, but almost 900,000 identified not NHPI in combination with another race. So right there, as you're kind of saying, it's not you. It's hard to just look at the numbers. You really have to kind of go deeper. And I'm kind of also thinking to what you said, like what it makes someone feel in terms of their self-worth if their origin is listed as other on something. So that's like when we are building out our self-identifying questions on our own site, like we want everyone to be able to kind of put them in, be as comprehensive as possible, because it doesn't feel good to like see your self-identity as other on something. So, that's something that's definitely just going to resonate in my mind after this conversation. And just thinking about, myself or anyone else who, is outside of the NHPI community, what can other communities and allies do to be better allies? What proactive steps can we take to help or to work with the NHPI community?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I think that at EPIC we strive to be create a voice, a unified voice for Pacific Islander communities on a national scale. And so we're constantly, asked by other communities of how, they can be better allies to us. I think there's a lot of ways. And I think one, it starts with being knowledgeable about who our communities are. And I'll start off, I guess, with, since you brought up the statistic about, how many NHPIs there are in the US. There's one number that's where NHPIs identify as NHPI alone. And then when you look at mixed race or multiracial, multi-ethnic Pacific Islanders, that number doubles. I myself am mixed race. My parents are from 2 different countries. And that's the same for so many of us. Almost 50% of all NHPIs, are mixed race. And that's such a powerful thing. And I think that in general, a lot of other, I guess, communities or even on a national scale can look to Pacific Islanders as a model for how diversity is growing in our community in the same way that it is for the US. And where the multiracial population is growing, really exponentially. But just going back to, how we can, how others can be better allies. I think starting off just with the education is knowing who we are and learning that from Pacific Islanders, and not just, I know that information is free online, but there's also good information and bad information. And so you want to make sure that your sources are coming from Pacific Islander people, so that you get the accurate, stories, and talk to, a lot of Pacific Islanders. We all have different histories and stories about who we are, and I think it's also important that I think being an ally is one thing, but I think being a co-conspirator can also be a little bit more powerful of a different type of relationship to have with our community. I think that means that you are more active in how you show up for us as a community. And I think that can look like not only knowing who we are, but also showing up for us and speaking up for us when we're not invited to a space we're in. You know, there's a quote, I really forgot who the person who said it is, but basically it says that there's no such thing as the voiceless, only the deliberately silenced, you know. So Pacific Islanders, people, you know, well, even sometimes I catch myself saying, you know, sometimes we don't have a voice, but that's not true. You know, we're in a lot of times intentionally left out of spaces because of, you know, things that are just rooted in systemic racism and systemic racial injustices. But, you know, be an ally or co-conspirator to us by advocating for our issues, advocating for our communities and spaces that we're unfortunately, you know, being silenced in. And look to our community leaders for how to show up as well. I think it's also important to say that, you know, if you're an ally who is, you know, saying we do Asian American and Pacific Islander work, or even if it's just another community outside of that umbrella that's saying, you know, we're bringing diversity by talking to AAPI, and you actually don't include Pacific Islander in that, that's actually a huge injustice to our community as well. So be intentional about, you know, if you use the term API, and also disaggregate that as much as possible in data. If you have data on, you know, how many people you serve and it says API, that's also something that needs to be changed. You know, we as a community are not visible in that because we make up, in reality, only 1% of that. So are we really seeing Pacific Islander statistics when, you know, we see API and we don't? Another thing I think is when we say Pacific Islander, I think a lot of people try to equate that with just Polynesian, and that's also problematic. I recognize, you know, my privilege as a Samoan, that we are oftentimes more visible than our other Pacific Islander relatives in the community. But Pacific Islander is not just Polynesian. It includes our relatives in Micronesia and Melanesia. So if you're doing, you know, API work, also reach out to those communities who even represent even, you know, smaller or underrepresented part of our, you know, really large NHPI umbrella. And I think also just to contribute to this narrative, this changing narrative about who Pacific Islanders are, you know, that we're just not, that we shouldn't, and we are not just valuable because of our physique or not just the stereotypes that people hear about us, that we are, you know, a large and diverse community. We have so many talents and strengths in more areas than people, you know, typically know about. And so, you know, try not to play into those stereotypes on our people.
Yeah, no, there's so much that you just said that resonated with me. It's, you know, first off, I think if you're wanting to look for more, a great way to be an ally or an advocate, as you said, or a co-conspirator, and I've heard that before too, a little bit more active term than ally. I mean, I would definitely recommend everyone go check out EPIC's website and see all the resources that you all have. And I'm just thinking too, when you're looking in maybe popular culture or media, probably good to look at who's creating that. Is there just a NHPI person on screen, but who's actually writing that script, who's telling that story behind the scenes? That's sometimes, I think, the extra work that we don't always do. And I love just what you're saying too about calling people out. You know, myself as a member of the LGBTQ community, some of the best advice I ever heard from someone is like, if you hear someone, you know, saying an anti-gay joke or a transphobic joke, you know, you have to mention that to someone. That, you know, sometimes they don't even know that they're doing it, and you have to bring that up and make it public. So just as you're saying, like, allies need to be, you know, calling out organizations to make sure that there are, you know, in a polite way, that there are like NHPI, you know, is there that NHPI representation at this event? Are you getting that quality of voice all across the board? So I know we're running out of time, but kind of as we start to wrap up, Karla, just love to say, you know, what is one thing that, you know, of all the stuff you've shared, so many great important notes about, you know, the NHPI community and your community, you know, what is something you want everyone to know about your community as a whole?
Yeah, I think I emphasized a lot about, you know, the changing narrative about who we are as a community in general. But I think what's so important to say this month, this AA and NHPI Heritage Month, for everyone to know is that, you know, API doesn't mean always AA and PI if you don't include the PI part. You know, you have to be inclusive of our community intentionally. And you know, if PIs aren't a part of your program, when you say API, then it's not actually AAPI. And so just call it, you know, for what it is. But there are ways that you can, you know, do your due diligence, and that's by reaching out to, you know, Pacific Islander-led communities. And that's not just EPIC. There's so many other organizations that exist here locally in California, across the US as well, that should be, you know, partnered with to elevate their community needs as well. But I just want to highlight that because I think that that's always a topic that comes up every May, is, you know, how do we actually ensure the visibility of all communities under that huge racial umbrella? And that goes for not only, you know, NHPIs, but there's also a lot of marginalized Asian American communities that need to be more visible this month as well. The Southeast Asian, the South Asian community as well. And so that's what I'd want everyone to know, is just about, you know, being inclusive and doing that intentionally, making sure that if you're using labels to uplift a community, that, you know, it's not, you're not just highlighting a certain, you know, part of the population, but doing your very best and actually doing the work to make even the most marginalized communities more visible.
Thank you. No, that I couldn't agree more. And in our last minute here, where can people find out more about EPIC and how to support you and learn more?
Yeah. So EPIC, we do have a website, it's empoweredpi.org. We also have social media platforms, really active on Instagram at empoweredpi is our user, as well as Twitter and Facebook. We are also, of course, would love to open it up to donations if folks would like to give to our organization. This coming summer, we're hosting our annual Summer Institute called the Pacific Islander Leaders of Tomorrow, or pilot program, which I was actually 11th. I was a member of the 11th cohort, and now we're on our 15th. So we develop young Pacific Islander emerging leaders for the community to, you know, eventually make social change for Pacific Islanders. So support us, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, to be up to date with, you know, what is going on with us. And we also share so many other important events or resources that other Pacific Islander communities offer as well.
Thank you so much. And we'll share some of those links in the chat so that everyone can see them there. And I know I did just see a question that came in. So before we turn it over to Hunter, maybe we can just do this lightning round style real quick, Karla. But Stephanie was asking, how do we feel about using the AAPI term to represent so many different cultures? It is a bit so yeah, so I mean, we touched on this a little bit, but, you know, is there a shift in that term? I know, you know, we've used NHPI a lot. So is there anything you want to comment on that in the last minute here?
Yeah, I think API is a term that has helped our communities build community in general. And I also at the same time think that it's used to the point where, you know, not all communities can really be highlighted there. We're not as visible, and sometimes it's not used to our advantage, right? It doesn't benefit us as much. So I think that it's important to disaggregate the racial categories when you need to. And NHPI should be disaggregated, period. And we have been since 1997, when, you know, the US disaggregate Asian Americans from Pacific Islanders. Obviously that was like 25 years ago. And so API continues to be used, but really it's sometimes, you know, there are some benefits, but also there's also some erasure that comes with it. So I would recommend always disaggregating when you can, not only just when using the label in general, but in everything. Like if you have data, if you're, you know, if you're saying you're hiring API folks, just say, you know, you want to hire, well, you know, both and separately, you know.
Yeah.
But that's my comment for that. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Stephanie. And I would definitely recommend anyone, you know, put, you know, if you're in your organization, look at how you're asking that question internally, put, you know, go escalate that to your managers. And, you know, even on a national scale, we can always kind of write to our elected officials as well and get changes made there. But thank you, Karla. This is super fascinating. I learned so much.